Welcome to American Pulse, our second United We Stand event. Our first event was in New York in Union League Club, and it was about terrorism and how to fight terrorism in the whole world. This event, I considered myself honored and very privileged to be amongst this wide range of expertise of global security and human rights and world peacemakers. So before we start our event, I would like to start with the national anthem, the Egyptian and then the American, please. Can we stand up? I would like also to stand for a moment of silence for all the people that died through genocide ever since the Holocaust, Armenian, and a lot of things happened in the world, and nowadays ISIS and Daesh is killing a lot of people. So as a sort of respect, we'll give them a moment of silence. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Now I'll give the podium to J.D. Gordon to introduce the event.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to join American Pulse today and sharing this very important dialogue. We have some of the world's foremost experts tonight to share their expertise on how to stop genocide and some recommendations for policymakers around the globe, because even though it seems counterintuitive that genocide could happen today, in today's advanced societies, it still is happening. People thought 100 years ago, when they fought the Great War, they called it at the time, we call it now World War I, that was the war to end all wars. There'd never be another one. In fact, the Armenian genocide in 1915 was a direct result of that war. But that wasn't the last World War. 30 years later, there was World War II, and instead of 14 million people dying, it was 60 million. So people say after the Holocaust, well, there could be never another Holocaust. Even the Holocaust happened, 10 million people died, 6 million Jews, but a lot of people didn't talk about the Holodomor, which was a decade earlier. In Ukraine, millions of Ukrainians died in a man-made famine caused by Stalin. So Holocausts can happen, they can be repeated, world wars can be repeated. That's why it's so important to bring the best minds in the world here today to share that expertise. We thought about this, Michael and I, up in New York a few months ago when he had the first United We Stand. It was United We Stand Combat Terrorism, and it had Egypt's Consul General to the United States up in New York. It also had an all-star panel with Herb London, Judith Miller, New York State Senator Martin Golden. I participated in it as well. And he has a TV show called American Pulse, which is 11 months old now, and it's broadcast on Saturday nights in New York. It broadcasts from New York to Egypt on Saturday nights, and you can see it on the web. In fact, half of our 6 panelists have been on the show. Tara Dahl was just on a week or so ago. Eric Stackelbach was on maybe 6 months ago, something like that, and Waleed Ferris maybe about a month ago. And Michael even lowered the bar and let me be on the show in February as well. So with that, I'd like to call the panelists up to the stage. In alphabetical order, I think I was going to call them up. Dr. James Carafano from Heritage. Tara Dahl from COGS. She runs her own foundation, formerly of Westminster Institute and of the Hill. Here's good. Yeah. Here you go. Let's see, Lena Karklina of the Center for European Policy Analysis from Latvia. Nadia Oedat from the New American Foundation, formerly of RAND Corporation. Dr. Waleed Ferris of Fox News Channel, and about 6 other affiliations. Professor of several, and also Eric Steckelbeck, one of my other greatest friends from CBN, host of The Watchmen. Okay, Michael's. Where's Michael? Here. Michael's going to kick it off. If you guys could each make about 5 minutes in opening remarks, and then Michael will facilitate a dialogue with you all and then with the audience. So thanks for coming, and I'll turn it over to Michael. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. So as I mentioned before, I'm honored and privileged to be amongst this wide range of expertise in global security, human rights, and world peacemakers. I would like to invite or talk about each of the panelists, given a little introduction, and I have, obviously, because they were sitting in a different order, so I have to. Okay, so Lena Carolina is a research associate at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Lena holds a bachelor degree in political science and a master's degree in diplomacy for the University of Latvia. During her undergraduate studies, she spent a semester studying at the Free University of Brussels, focusing on international relations. Previously, Lena worked as a project manager in the Latvian Transatlantic Organization. She also worked for the President of Latvia as a coordinator of the expert group for the enhancement of public management in Latvia. Welcome to the show. Can you give us your remarks, 5 to 10 minutes, please?
Thank you, Michael, for inviting me. Thank you for Jeff for inviting me to be here. You're probably wondering what is my relation to Middle East studies. I'm not a Middle East expert, as I told Jeff when I agreed to be in a panel. But what I am from Baltic states. I'm from Eastern Europe, and I've experienced a lot what's been happening in 20th century. My family is history lesson on its own, taken all together. So, so first I would like to express my deepest disappointment of our memory as one of the real useful tools for people to lead us a useful and effective life, because they haven't been very good at it. Although they say in Latvia that the ones who memorize more, they get older much sooner, as my mom always told me. I would like to disagree. I think the memory is the one thing that we should use to learn from something, and we haven't been very good at it. Violence, war, crimes against humanity, and genocide is a dark proof and reminder of that. Although a relatively new and still broadly discussed and never purely clear term, genocide has been happening for centuries all over the world. And even after the most dreadful in our memories, the Nazi regime and Holocaust, when approximately 6 million victims were, and the international community said never again, as Jeff mentioned today, we are still repeating the same mistakes. And here I mean both, committing genocide and, more importantly, as we speak today, understanding and ignoring genocide when it's happening. Although I've been lucky enough to have been born in Latvia, when it was a free and democratic country, the dreadful history of the 20th century goes through all stories of my family. There are just too many reasons why I could not have been here today or have never been born. Starting from wars the men of my family have been involved in against the will, to the most crucial for me personally, the mass deportations from Baltic states to Siberia in 1941 and 1949. The mass deportations were never recognized as a genocide by the United Nations. Definition of genocide because atrocities targeted political and economic groups rather than ethnic, racial, religious, or national groups. However, it was undoubtedly a crime against humanity. Mass deportations to remove faraway places in Siberia was one of the most used tools by the Soviet leaders to take complete control over the society and strengthen their power. Latvia faced the first deportation in June 14, 1941, when more than 15,000 people were sent to Gulag, death camps in Siberia. Most of them were members of the national elite, statesmen, scientists, artists, and businessmen. The goal of this deportation was to remove all potential anti-Soviet elements from Latvia. The next and the largest deportation of the Latvian people took place in 1949. The target of this deportation was former wealthy farmers, or kulaks as they call them. The goal was to prepare Latvia for complete agricultural collectivization and also get rid of the national resistance. On March 25th, the deportation was carried out in all Latvia. Whole families taken away from their homes and loaded into cargo and cattle trains. By that time, more than 42,000 people, with many of them children, were taken to Siberia. My whole family was on the list for the second deportations, including my 2-month-old father and his twin sister, who had been born prematurely. They would have never survived the cold day of March 25, 1949. And only because of a lucky coincidence that allowed them to stay, I stand here in front of you today. The family of my brother's wife are Ukrainian. Happenings in Ukraine today, but also the history of 20th century, brings back the disappointment in our memory and learning from our history. Holodomor, translated from Ukrainian, means death by hunger, is one vivid and dreadful reminder of this. After a series of arrests, killings, and deportations, Stalin regime went further in 1932 and 1933, setting in motion events designed to cause famine that caused death of an estimated 7 million people. All of it happened in front of our eyes of international society. Some were fooled by Stalin's propaganda, but some knew. Diplomats and government leaders knew, but didn't do anything about it because of economic interests, ignorance, and misperceptions. Today we are watching from this side of the ocean on what is happening in Ukraine, in Baltics, and in the Middle East. We see the tragedy, we know the facts, but we lack the action. We have not learned from our mistakes. We do not know what to do, or perhaps we know, but there is no reaction. Politics and ignorance again. I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion and panel. It would be very interesting for me to hear an actual options of what we could do to react on what's happening in the Middle East region and how to prevent genocide in the future. Because I feel like 21st century is about the time when we say never again and actually maybe mean it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lena. Dr. James Carafano, Vice President for the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. He's a leading expert in national security and foreign policy challenges in the Heritage Foundation, Vice President, Foreign and Defense Policy Studies. Dr. Carafano is an accomplished historian and a teacher and a writer, whose most recent book is Wiki at War, Conflict in Socially Networked World, a survey of the revolutionary impact on the Internet age on national security. He was selected from the thousands to speak on cyber warfare at the 2014 South by Southwest Interactive Conference in Austin, Texas. Welcome to American Pulse.
Thank you. So I was really intrigued and really excited about participating in this today because from two perspectives. One is I'm a historian by training, and actually thought of how the world is done in the history of stopping genocide, and the answer is pretty bad. Matter of fact, I'm struggling to think of episodes where genocide was actually stopped. It's most akin to a forest fire. Once the fire begins to rage, I can't really think of many historical examples where the fire didn't burn furiously before it just petered out on its own or people belatedly show up. And for my own research in the areas that I work in, the analogy seems to kind of work for me because the only really effective way to stop a genocide is to actually never see it start to begin with. And so in forest fire, you have these guys, the fire jumpers and the shooters who jump in and they put out the sparks before the flame begins, because once the flame begins, it burns out of control. So what really prevents that? And two things I think that in areas that I work with, I think are relevant to this discussion. One is the international norms and the ideas are such that this type of behavior as a political agenda or a security agenda is simply unthinkable, or a religious agenda. And the other is to having the capacity, both within the state and with other states, in order to prevent that behavior from happening. So it's the vitality, the stability, the strength, and the capacity of the states. I'm going to talk just briefly about the United States because I want to argue, and it's not a partisan comment, it's just an observation from working at this is over a decade, looking at both Republican and Democrat administrations, where I think the United States' capacity to contribute to creating global conditions that decrease the potential for genocide is actually poor and gotten worse. So let me talk about the international norm just very, very quickly. So the notion of human rights, which I think is fundamental to creating international norms which make this kind of behavior unthinkable, I think that's under attack and inversion. And I think I would argue in this administration what we have seen is, with the original conception of human rights stemming from natural rights was, what are the rights that individuals are endowed with which allows them to exercise their freedom and creates safe communities which are sustainable and resilient? And we've inverted that to be, what are the rights that fit my political agenda? And so, for example, this administration, I think, would argue vociferously they have a very powerful human rights agenda, but I don't think anybody that's operated in this field traditionally over time would argue that these are actually human rights. So, for example, income inequality might be an interesting philosophy or a political agenda, but it's fundamentally not a human right. I think climate change we can debate that, it's really, really interesting, but somehow reinterpreting this as a fundamental human right, I think, is an error. And so you have a lot of activity and churn on activities that I don't think are central to creating the international norms which make genocide impermissible. And I'll point to two, which I think are much more relevant to the discussion here. One is religious liberty. Religious liberty is in a terrible state in the world today. It's inarguably a fundamental human right established in the tradition, and yet 3/4 of the world today, religious liberty is in peril. I think that's a serious problem. I think this administration does absolutely nothing about that. And I'll point to a second one, which we generally call economic freedom, which is the capacity of individuals to look after themselves and their family and their community. When we talk specifically about the Middle East, one of the things the Heritage Foundation produces each year is the Index of Economic Freedom, where we grade every country in the world on 10 factors related to their economic freedom. And we all know that economic freedom was at the root cause of many of the uprisings in the Arab Spring. The state of economic freedom in the Middle East today is very poor. And countries which are struggling to embrace economic freedom, like Tunisia and Egypt, are not getting any help. The United States has a terrible record here. Property rights, rule of law, corruption. These are very serious problems, and the administration, for all its rhetoric and concern about the Middle East, has done really nothing to help the cause of economic freedom in the Middle East in a serious way. So I think we failed on the norms front in that we have not really pressed a traditional human rights agenda, which is fundamental to making the conditions of genocide impossible. And I'll just briefly talk about the second, which is having the capacity to act and prevent or preempt these kinds of activities. One of the other indexes that we produce is called the Index of U.S. Military Strength. And what we try to do there is measure the U.S. military strength from year to year relative to the capabilities that the U.S. military has, the threats that we face in the world, our vital interests, and the areas in which we operate. So we identified 3 areas which are really critical to U.S. interests and which we really can't afford to compromise. And those are Asia, the Middle East, and Western Europe. In all 3 of those today, we have areas of serious concern where the potential for genocide is not insignificant. We rated in 2014 the U.S. capacity as marginal. So our military capability, the world's largest, most powerful military, we spend more than anybody else in the world, and we're marginal. I think that's an enormous concern. So our capacity to intervene, even if we have the will, is increasingly diminished. And that's in the areas that are vital to us. What happens when we're talking about places where U.S. interests are less vitally, whether it's in southern Africa or Latin America or some of the distant parts of the Pacific? And I'm concerned about the U.S. having the capacity and the willingness to help stop these problems on the front end. So I come here kind of sad that I don't actually think the U.S. is a very good partner for preventing the really horrific kinds of things that we're concerned about in the world today.
Thank you very much for your remark. Next I have is Tara Dow, is the Executive Director and Co-founder of Council on Global Security. Previously, Tara was a Congressional Fellow with the Westminster Institute of McLean, Virginia, where her duties included briefing members of Congress and their staffers on the global terrorist threat with specific focus on Egypt and the broader Middle East. She has traveled extensively to Cairo, Egypt since last 4 years ago, to bridge the gap and form a platform of understanding between Egypt and the United States. Welcome to American Pulse.
Thank you, Michael. It's really good to be here, especially with Egypt TV, because as you mentioned, I've spent a lot of time in Egypt the last 2 years. And Egypt I just truly believe that Egypt is a pivotal role right now in the global strategy to be able to stop terrorism. So it's a great honor to be here today.
Thank you.
And so, as Michael said, I've traveled extensively the last 2 years in the Middle East, hearing from people on the ground and being able to understand the situation from in the region. And I think that's a big part that the United States is missing, is that there seems to be a major lack of understanding from what's going on in the region compared to our policy. And that's so I've been to Egypt, I've been to Kurdistan, I was in Syria, to be able to, in Israel during the Gaza conflict, to be able to really listen to what the people who are on the front lines every single day, who are losing their lives every single day in the battle, and to be able to learn from them, and that will influence our policy. And I think that's where we can look back at the United States policy back since 9/11, and to look at all the failures or what we've done wrong. But I think it's important to look at it today. What can we do today to be able to make a difference? Because every single day that we don't adopt a global strategy to defeat terrorism, lives are being lost every single day. And so we don't have time. Time is not on our side. I don't agree that this is something that's going to be 1 to 2 years, 3 years strategy. It's something that we need to adopt now. We can do it now. We have the technology to do it now. we have the equipment. We are the strongest military in the world. And I think that's a frustration when you talk to people over in the Middle East, is that they look to the United States. They look to us to be able to be the leader and to be able to help in the situation. And we haven't helped. And that's where I think we're starting to see now where leaders, other countries are starting to rise up on their own now and saying, we're going to have to start doing something because we can no longer wait for the United States to act. And so that's why it's good to come here today and to be able to talk about actual policy solutions that can be implemented now that will make a difference. And one of the areas that I'd like to really talk about today is Libya, and to really speak about the situation in Libya. There was a recent delegation from Tobruk that came to Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago. And they met with members of Congress to be able to talk about the situation in Libya and try to get support for the legitimate, democratically elected government in Tobruk. And then also get help from the Libyan army, for the new Libyan army. And there was some frustration because we didn't understand, and they said that we don't have time. The policymakers that they met with said you have to have a unity government before we can help you militarily. And they were saying, well, we don't really have time on our side. Every single day they just had 900 migrants, that were killed. There's hundreds and thousands that are fleeing right now. 400,000, they said, this year that have fled Libya. And so people are being killed every single day. You just had the 30 the Ethiopians that were beheaded, and before that, the 21 Egyptians that were beheaded in Libya. So it's great to be here today to be able to talk about actual policies that we can do. And I think a lot of times that people look to the administration and they think, well, the administration won't do anything, so what can we do? But the citizen can do something. We're a nation by the people, we the people. Everybody has a voice and everybody can participate. So I hope we can discuss ways that just the people can get involved.
Yes, we will. Thank you, Tara, for your insights. Next I have... So I have next in the list, Dr. Nadia Awidat. She is focusing on Arab and Islamic thought. Her studies are funded by leadership scholarship entitled Lord Winfield Leadership Program. Prior to starting her doctoral studies, Nadia worked as a research associate for the RAND Corporation. Welcome to United We Stand 2 by American Pulse.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
And like my friend, I also have a soft spot for Egypt because I did my PhD thesis on a great Egyptian scholar, Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid.
Oh, wow.
So imagine if when we look at the Middle East and we look at the problems that have been escalating for almost 50 years, imagine if we couldn't actually use the military to solve the problem. And imagine if there are solutions that are already in the region that if we were to support and pay attention to, they can take care of the solution. So this is what I want to focus on. So when I did counterterrorism research, I noticed that a lot of the focus was on the problem. Let's study terrorists. Let's focus on terrorists. Look at what terrorists are doing right. They are monopolizing social media. But I'm doing research on how Arabic speakers, who are almost 500 million people, use the internet. And what I found out actually is that a majority of them want democracy, liberal values, human rights, etc. And this is revealed by their, what are they attracted to online. So if you look at the most top 10 YouTube channels, what do people watch? Like people say, the videos of ISIS go viral. Actually, this number one YouTube channel in Egypt was Bassem Youssef, a show that was critical of authoritarianism, be it social, political, religious, but it's making fun of authoritarianism. It's the same thing all over the Arab world, actually. In Jordan, number one show is its equivalent. It's people who are very creative, very peaceful, very civilized, educating others how to be sensitive to authoritarianism. Because we have to target people. We're talking about people. And if we don't have that consciousness of being sensitive to the other, that you have no right to actually impose your will on another. Unless we actually advance this consciousness of tolerance and pluralism, how is it that we can get to countries or get to... So it starts with people. So the Arab Spring, which everybody thought opened a window of hope, that wow, these are peaceful, inclusive, gender equal young people who toppled dictatorships, maybe there's hope. But then the violent reaction to the legitimate demands of this generation, quickly, the attention was focused again on the violence, on the atrocities by different militants, etc., etc. But what I'm noticing again online is that same generation that wants, the thing is, it's not violent, but just because it's not violent doesn't mean it's not effective. It's silent. But do you hear about the Gandhis of the Middle East? Why are we only focusing on the criminals? So I want to introduce you to what is happening in that space that is almost entirely absent from our media attention. But it needs to be part of our media attention if we were to really be part of the solution. You don't solve a problem by focusing only on the problem. You need to look at the solution. You have young Arab women and men from all over the region, whether it's Sudan, Yemen, Jordan, Palestine, all over, engaging in self-learning, in teaching each other, and to tell you about this generation, there has never been a generation in the Arab world that is this literate, this wired, connected to the outside world. What happens anywhere is local news for it. This is very different from my parents' generation. We are global citizens, born global citizens. And this is, a lot of our regimes want to take us back to my parents' generation. It's impossible. It's like trying to take people to the Stone Age. It's too late. You cannot turn back the clock. So I want to give you examples of these solutions that need to be embraced and need to be focused on and need to be supported. So Ahmed, for example, is a 25-year-old Yemeni man. He doesn't have a university degree. Like many in the Arab world, he taught himself how to make movies online. When he was in high school, he made his first movie and got 8,000 people to watch it. And then he started reaching online to other professionals. Soon he was getting gigs for BBC, Al Jazeera, etc. But the most phenomenal thing about this 25-year-old Yemeni young man is that now he is training children ages 11 to 17 to make short movies. And if anybody is interested, I'd love to share this. These movies are winning awards, and when I showed them to people who are from Hollywood, they couldn't believe these are made by children, let alone Yemeni children. So this young man is changing the lives of generations. Have you ever heard of him? Is he on CNN? Why isn't he on CNN? Why aren't we putting the light on somebody who's doing something right and elevating them? Because we need role models. Extremists promise their victims that they will be heroes. Why not make a hero out of somebody like Ahmed? I'll give you another example. A few young, again, men and women in Jordan created a blog called Hibr. I mean, seriously, so my PhD, as my friend Michael mentioned, is on Islamic thought. When I read the critique, the writings of these kids, I wish I could teach them, because I will learn from them as much as I could teach them, because they are so incredibly critical, well-organized. The level of writing is above anything available, honestly, in state-owned media. They're among the top 10 blogs in the Arab world. And what are they doing? Again, they are hosting a lot of workshops. They are teaching storytelling. They're teaching citizen journalism. So you see people, they are just reaching out and becoming citizens who are changing the lives around them. But again, has anybody heard about them? Are they on CNN? Are they being covered? I'll give you another example of a Jordanian filmmaker. She's now 29. She made 2 movies. Each of the movies changed laws that affects hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions. One of them actually was banned, but she found a way to stream it in the parliament while the parliament was in session. And it led to changing the law that governs how Syrian refugees in Jordan receive their allowance. So she truly affected about 1 million refugees' life. She's 29, she's now in self-exile. A lot of them are struggling for funding, struggling for, how is it that there are millions available for weapons and not peanuts available to these young people who are so driven to make a difference in their communities? I mean, I can give you examples on and on and on. And again, you cannot believe where they come from. Because the internet is enabling this generation to learn whatever they want. If you are driven enough, and there are many that are driven, they have time. I'm sure you know that. So 80% of the Arab world is under 40. 80%. 50 is under 25. And among the segment that is 25 and younger, illiteracy is almost 0, according to the World Bank. So they also have, the Arab world, #1 unemployment, despite being the richest area on earth. So all these contradictions, they are wired, literate, they have time, and they are teaching themselves. But nobody is paying attention. But I want to conclude that, you know, 1 tree falling makes a lot of noise. But 1 million trees growing make no noise at all. And we need to pay attention to that beautiful forest that is growing and water it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nida. Next I have on the list Dr. Walid Faris. Dr. Walid is a professor. He served as, and is still serving as an advisor to the anti-terrorism program to the U.S. House of Representatives. He briefs and testifies Congress, United States Security Council on, and United Nations Security Council on matters related to international security and Middle East conflict. He has published 12 books in English, Arabic, French. Welcome to United We Stand too, Dr. Walid Faris.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank you personally, Dr. Michael and JD, for initiating this great program.
Thank you very much.
This is not just a program, one of the many think tanks programs in the U.S. This is connected to the heart of the Arab world. This goes through a TV program in Egypt that I have been the guest of, and I would like to take advantage of this to send them my best regards for the simple reason that, as my colleague was mentioned, things are changing in the region, and one of the manifest changes were in Egypt, as Tara has mentioned. I have witnessed how this program, القاهرة والناس, during the early stages of the last uprising in Egypt, were responsible. They didn't use bullets, they didn't use tanks, they used words. And I followed them almost 24 hours. I couldn't sleep because this was the biggest revolution I have seen, at least so far in civil society in the Middle East. 33 million people walking on the streets of Egypt. That is almost a miracle. So thank you for what you're doing and for the bridge you're establishing.
You're welcome.
My few minutes are going to be, I don't want to add too much to the great experiences here, except I like to organize a little bit my thoughts. So I would like to say one thing about what do we mean when we say genocide or ethnic cleansing, because that could take us into different directions. And number two, who are we talking about when we mention genocide now in the Middle East, because it has a long history. And third, though I won't add much to what has been said, what are the new strategies, which is what we're going to be discussing. I mean, these are strategies that involve government and civil society and now media, obviously. So quickly on the first point, there are stages. I mean, genocide meaning the termination of an entire community. That's what we mean by genocide. It comes from the term gens, the entire population. Ethnic cleansing is removing a population from a certain area with or without genocide. Now, there's a chain of events that we saw over the past maybe 100 years. I don't want to go beyond that. It all begins with a set of ideas, an ideological set of ideas that would permit such thing to happen. We have not seen genocides, among animals. They don't kill each other just by encountering each other. It happened when human ideas, forming an ideology allowed the notion that you could terminate another group based on a variety of things. Based on you need more space, based on ideologies, based on social ideologies. I mean, mentioning Stalin and Mao. If you want to talk about the largest numbers that have been terminated, these are the great terminators of the 20th and still 21st century. And of course, our history, we don't want to go back to the history of empires. There have been terminations of people. But that goes back not to a need because the basic instincts by people is to live peacefully. But then these ideologies comes and then excite and mobilize, and they have several roots. One is ultranationalism. I mean, when you put in the minds of people that if you don't terminate the other community, you won't be able to have a breathing space. Or socioeconomics. I mean, these are the enemies of our class, and therefore they need to be terminated. Or in terms of religious fundamentalism, that the world is divided in two spaces. One that should live, and the other one, if they don't submit, then they should be terminated. So it is very important to understand that genocides do not occur in chaos. They are organized. And there are policies of genocide or ethnic cleansing, and then policies that we would submit to counter. Second, we've seen, since it has been mentioned, World War II, from the Holocaust to what Stalin has done to Biafra in Nigeria, to Sudan. These are the great cases that we actually teach in courses, and all the way to our times, the times of ISIS and the times of the jihadi organization that terminates, maybe not in large numbers, but they indicate in what they're doing, killing 21 Egyptian citizens, 21 Copts, because this is backed by an ideology. And ethnic cleansing communities from Mosul, this is backed by an ideology. And of course, suppressing communities as minorities, ethnic and religious minorities in Iran or in Pakistan, this is backed by an ideology. So what is happening right now in terms of ethnic cleansing and genocide needs to be looked at, not in terms of chaos, but in terms of organized ideology. So the third point I'm making, what is it that we can do? And when we say we, you have the international community, you have governments, including our super government, the US, and also civil society, and of course what has been mentioned in terms of Arab Spring, in terms of multiple upheavals in the region, the Green Revolution in Iran, all these, I think, are part of the greater response. Because we have the government response producing DVDs talking about how good we are in the State Department, or even hearings and briefings. We've had that for a long time. The real revolution, as my colleague has mentioned, is happening in the region, absolutely in the region. And there are two parameters. Parameter number one is the mothers, the moms. Who is in touch with the kid from 0 to age 7? Across the hundreds of millions of people in the region. The mother, al-mama. Whatever she instilled in the mind of the baby is going to allow or not allow massacres and genocide on the head. So what is our policy towards moms and towards women in the region? That would make a major difference. And second, after the age of 4 or 5, where does baby go? To school. So we have another huge ally, the teacher. Should it be Afghanistan or should it be other places? The teachers are crucial, the NGOs of education. Do we have policies with regard to that in Congress or in the administration or the European Parliament? That is matter to discuss here. So I'm going to stop here. This is a fantastic subject. Thank you again, and I'll be very, very happy to engage with you.
Thank you, Dr. Faris. Last but not least, my friend, Eric Steckelbach. And Eric is, as much as everybody's very special to me in this panel, Eric is very special because I had him in my show in one of the very, very first episode to American Pulse. So he witnessed the birth of the program. So Eric has been the show host for The Watchmen and CBN News. And Eric had in many books, and he had studied a lot about the terrorists and jihadists, and he knows a lot about them. I was joking with a friend of mine from Egypt last week, and I told him he knows Muslim Brotherhood more than I do. So welcome to the show, Eric.
Great to be here, Michael. Thank you all for being here. JD, Michael, thanks so much for having me. Great panel here, an all-star panel. I must say, tough act to follow. Well, I want to pick up where Waleed left off a bit on the ideology, because I think we really need to understand, we're talking about genocide, but number one, I think we need to mention some of the specifics of what really is taking place in the Middle East right now in real time as we speak. And it's driven by an ideology. And I think, first of all, here in the West, our leadership needs to acknowledge that that ideology exists. Right now, we can't say words like jihadist. Yes, this exists. A jihadist movement, the likes of ISIS and other jihadist groups, Al-Qaeda, which are carrying out or attempting to carry out a genocide in the Middle East. They follow an ideology. I think that's a key point here. What is that ideology leading them to do? Number one, I just wrote a book about ISIS. Not a very pleasant way to spend a few months writing and researching the most savage terrorist movement in the world. But right now, ISIS, for example, when you're talking about genocide, the vanquished people, the people you conquer, you consider them basically as subhuman. Their lives are worth nothing. So when ISIS rolls into a town, a city, or a village, and they take the vanquished populations, they'll murder them or they'll enslave them. That could be Christians, Kurds, Yazidis, and by the way, Muslims who do not subscribe to this extremist jihadist ideology that ISIS follows. So what's going on? We've talked about the mass executions on the beaches of Libya and in Iraq and Syria, crucifixions in the streets of Raqqa. The women right now are the greatest victims, I believe, of this genocide. In my book, I talk about how ISIS is running brothels, quite literally, brothels, where women they capture, Yazidi women in particular, thousands of Yazidi women, are being used as sex slaves. In 2015, modern day slavery. And ISIS is endorsing this. And these brothels, by the way, are run in many cases by Western women. We talk about the ideology and how this genocidal ideology really reaches around the world. ISIS has recruited people from 90 countries around the world. So you have British women, this is astounding, British citizens running brothels in Syria where Yazidi women are sex slaves. That's astounding. These are Westerners, raised here in the West, fluent in English, in a prosperous society with all the benefits that affords. Yet they've responded to this genocidal ideology. And ladies and gentlemen, look, I think that's a key point as we discuss this, because we're talking about the Middle East, of course. We're focusing Middle East, North Africa, what's going on there. But we need to get Westerners' attention. I speak as an American, as a Westerner. We need to galvanize people in the West, I truly believe, to get a handle on this. And how do you get their attention? Unfortunately, many times here in the West today, there are so many distractions that people say, you know what? It's such a shame what's happening in the Middle East right now. I really feel for the Kurds, the Yazidis, the Christians, and the peace-loving Muslims in the Middle East who are being massacred right now. It's a shame, but hey, the football game's on and the Kardashians are on, and I don't have time to think about that. It's too stressful. Well, guess what? This ideology has now traveled in our backyard. Our FBI director, James Comey, made a very stunning statement recently. He said right now, this is from the mouth of our FBI director, right now in all 50 U.S. states, including Alaska and Hawaii, we have investigations ongoing into ISIS-related activity here on American soil. So that genocidal ideology is followed by some people here. And Director Comey said just last week, after an attempted terror attack in Texas, that potentially thousands of Americans follow ISIS online. Now the web, talk about social media savvy. ISIS is a different beast for many reasons. Literally a different beast, but look, they send out, ISIS and its network of followers around the world send out 90 tweets per minute. That's astounding. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on these slickly produced propaganda videos that look like a Hollywood action movie. And they're doing it to great effect. Their propaganda, their social media arms are controlled in many cases by Westerners who were raised here, who speak English, who know how to connect with young people via the web. We've had up to 5,000 Europeans leave their comfortable homes, travel to Iraq and Syria. So as we talk about strategies now, Dr. Morgan, I think, look, one thing we need to do is be active. Think of Radio Free Europe in the 1980s with communist ideology. Fight back. The jihadists, the genocidal murderers, are using social media, using the web, using modern technology to great effect, and galvanizing their followers and getting the message out. They're combining 7th century barbarity with 21st century technology. It's a quite lethal mix. So why can't we use all the tools at our disposal? We essentially created social media here in the West, so why aren't we taking advantage of it and utilizing it? Think of Radio Free Europe again. My gosh, we can't do that today. We have so many more tools at our disposal today. But in doing it, no matter how you do it, which facet you use, you must attack and discredit the ideology. Discredit the ideology, demoralize the global movement and the followers. But first, ladies and gentlemen, to do that, we have to acknowledge that this ideology exists and stop turning our heads as men, women, and children of all ethnicities, religions are being slaughtered right now in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you very much.